Since October 2023, the United States has spent over $30 billion in taxpayer money tied to Israel's wars, including more than $20 billion in direct military aid to Israel. It's not over a decade, not over the course of a presidency, over $30 billion in just over 2 years. And most Americans have no idea how the spending of all that money, their hard-earned tax dollars, actually works. So let's walk through it. Let's start with the most direct form of military funding to Israel. Every single year, the United States gives Israel about $3.8 billion in military aid, locked in under a long-term agreement that runs through 2028. That money doesn't depend on there being a war. It doesn't depend on policy changes. It's automatic. This represents roughly 16 to 20% of Israel's defense budget in a normal year, one without a protracted war going on. But since October 2023, that baseline military funding to Israel has exploded. In the first tranche of further funding, the U.S. approved roughly $17.9 billion in additional military aid to Israel, on top of the usual funding. That brings the total direct U.S. military aid to Israel since October 2023 to at least $21.7 billion. And that's just what went to Israel. The U.S. has also spent somewhere between $9.6 to $12 billion on its own military operations in the region, Yemen, Iran, the broader Middle East, which have largely been in support of Israel. So combined, we're looking at roughly $31 to $34 billion in total U.S. spending in wars tied to Israel, and counting. But guess what? The number of American tax dollars to and in support of Israel is not final. Congress has already approved or proposed multiple additional funding streams. A $14.3 billion emergency military supplemental for Israel passed in April 2024. In March 2025, Secretary of State Marco Rubio evoked emergency authority to fast-track approximately $4 billion in additional military assistance, bypassing congressional review. On February 7th, 2025, the Trump administration formally notified Congress of a separate $8.4 billion arms package, the largest single munitions sale to Israel since 2015. And it doesn't even include the tens of billions of dollars in long-term weapons contracts already in the pipeline. As of April 2025, the State Department reported 751 active foreign military sales cases with Israel, valued at $39.2 billion. In other words, the spending we're seeing now is just the front end. Now, here's the part that most people misunderstand. The United States isn't giving Israel weapons. It's giving Israel money to buy American weapons. Through a program called Foreign Military Financing, FMF, the U.S. sends Israel grant money, not loans, but grants. And that money is specifically earmarked to be spent on U.S. defense companies. The flow looks like this. American taxpayers pay their taxes to the government. The U.S. government then takes a huge chunk of that money and gives it to Israel so that Israel can buy weapons from U.S. manufacturers. So U.S. military aid to Israel is like a backdoor subsidy to U.S. weapons manufacturers. Some might say, so if the money comes back to the U.S. to buy weapons from American defense contractors, what does it matter? Because of what economists call budget substitution. If the U.S. is paying billions for Israel's military costs, that frees up Israel's own tax revenue to be spent elsewhere. And that helps support Israel's ability to provide its citizens with universal health care and subsidized university education. Not because the U.S. is directly funding those things, but because, as previously mentioned, it's covering a significant portion of Israel's military budget burden. This is all happening while in the United States, a lot of working-class Americans struggle to secure health care and pay for education. Now layer on top of that the United States and Israel's war with Iran, which, as of this recording, is ongoing, the price tag for which is staggering and still climbing. The first 6 days alone cost American taxpayers an estimated $11.3 billion, according to Trump administration officials in a closed-door congressional briefing. By day 12, the Center for Strategic and International Studies estimated that the total cost had reached around $16.5 billion. And it's recently been reported that the Pentagon is seeking to ask Congress for a supplemental military spending bill of around $200 billion. The though the final number of the Pentagon's supplemental funding request is still being debated inside the Trump administration and hasn't yet been approved by Congress. But let's be clear about what this means. At an estimated $1 billion per day in ongoing costs, the war with Iran is now the most expensive U.S. military operation in the Middle East since Iraq. That $200 billion supplemental request, if passed, would alone exceed everything the U.S. spent on direct military aid to Israel across the entire first 2 years of Israel's genocidal military campaign in Gaza. And there's still no defined endpoint to all this spending. So let's step back and look at the full picture. $3.8 billion in baseline military aid to Israel, automatic locked in through 2028. $21.8 billion in direct military aid to Israel since October 7th, 2023. $31 to $34 billion in total U.S. spending on post-October 2023 wars, and that's before Operation Epic Fury against Iran. Tens of billions more already approved are moving through the pipeline. And now an active war with Iran, which cost U.S. taxpayers $11.3 billion in the first 6 days alone, with an additional $200 billion supplemental expected from the Pentagon. And again, all of that military aid to Israel is not loans. It's grant money that will never be repaid. So when is enough enough? American taxpayers should be furious. About 60% of Americans can be classified as working class. Most of these are hardworking people who get up early or work late or both and worry every day about how they're going to stretch their paycheck to cover their bills and take care of their family. A lot of American workers don't have health care, can't afford to buy a home or send their kids to college. To think that billions and billions of their hard-earned tax dollars are going directly to Israel and fight wars on Israel's behalf must be infuriating. And what has Israel done with that military aid? A genocidal war in Gaza, protecting illegal settlements and settler terrorists in the West Bank, launching an invasion of South Lebanon and pushing the Trump administration into a needless war with Iran. So the question is, at what point do American taxpayers say enough is enough and demand accountability for their tax dollars? After all, if you're an American, it's your government and it's your money.